Okay, do we need to face a particular way, or
No, you're fine.
everybody, no, okay.
Are we ready to roll?
Ready to roll?
Stand by.
Okay.
I'll tell you when I'm rolling.
Center camera's rolling.
I'm rolling. Hold on. Camera 3's rolling.
Okay.
Audio, yep.
Okay. Mark it.
So the Mobile Museum of Art is bringing the Garden Parks exhibit. He's a photographer. He made the movie Shaft. That's the one that we probably know best. And he did some photographs in the 50s talking about segregated Mobile. And so we invited you because we know that you've been paying attention a long time to this, that you got some opinions that y'all don't mind sharing. We wanted to be loose and informal, not just a question and answer, just as like y'all were sitting over on the block talking like y'all do. So,
I don't know if you want to put that on.
but that's what we're looking for. And so we're gonna start with Mr. John Red Guy.
Well, good evening. My name is John Guy. I've seen a lot. I can remember the days back when you take Mobile, Davis Avenue, and then you had Albright and Wood drugstore on the corner of Hospital and Davis Avenue. You had Baby's Hot Dog on Hospital Street, just a piece off the avenue, about half a block off the avenue. Then you had Hartman Drug. You had Jim's Old Fashioned Barbecue. You had Blue Light Studio. You had the Blue Eagle. You had the Poem Garden. You had the Big Apple. You had the Red Rooster. You had Buster Eagle Pawn Shop. You had William Howard Cleaner. You had Craig Bakery. And on and on.
At one time, you could walk out there at 6 o'clock and look down Davis Avenue, and you couldn't tell the difference if you was on 142nd Street in New York. People were walking up and down the street. The neon lights was glowing. Businesses was out there, like Sam said. And they was owned by people in the community.
Yeah. Well,
They shared in the wealth.
the economy on Davis Avenue was good.
It was
It was
good.
very good
Yeah.
because that's where people went.
Were all of those black only, or was it black and white patronizing it, or what?
The majority patronizing was black.
Did you go to school off the avenue
I
somewhere?
went to school in Cushman.
In Cushla, okay. And was that a segregated school?
Oh, yeah. See, and then too, well, segregation been around a long time, because when I went into service, I went in 1945, and when I came out, I spent 18 months in the service. It was still segregated. So it's been segregation down through the years.
It was segregated when you left, segregated when you came back.
Right. It was segregated for years.
Were there any white people living in the area?
I cannot recall no white living. No.
Not down this way, not on
No.
the north side? Okay. So, Mr. Crenshaw,
My name is George H. Crenshaw, a lifelong resident, born and raised in Mobile. I was born where people look at Broad Street or Henry Aaron Loop crossing Davis Avenue now. At the time, Washington Avenue came in and intersect there. I'm quite sure Sam and Red both know where I'm talking about. They're looking at the same picture. I lived in the row houses there. He spoke about the Blue Eagle. The Blue Eagle was on Davis Avenue. Pick and Pay was a fruit stand on the corner that you turn off to Washington Avenue walking. There were several row houses. They were a 3-room house, living room, middle room, kitchen, common bath on the porch. Two people used it.
Okay. So they were
They was
connected?
connected, yes, on that end of Washington Avenue, north end of Washington Avenue. Then there was Lowndes Street that came in. And the church that I can remember that, Mount Island number 2 was on the corner of Lowndes and Washington Avenue. They moved it from there in the early 50s to where it is now.
So where'd you go to school?
I went to school, I'll say, we moved from there in 53. I didn't go to Caldwell. All my brothers and sisters in front of me started at Caldwell, but we moved to the north side, which most people call the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And I attended Orange School. And from Orange School, I went to Dunbar. And from Dunbar to Central.
How many brothers and sisters?
That was 7 boys and 5 girls.
Wow.
That's not uncommon for that time,
Yeah.
to have large families.
And where did you fall in there?
In the middle, I was 7th.
Okay.
I don't know how lucky it is, but I was 7th.
Okay. So you had 5 younger than you? 4?
Absolutely.
5.
1 brother and 4 sisters. That was younger, my sibling, younger siblings.
So what did you see during that time as you were growing up from there through high school? What were the things that you saw that were the markers of segregation?
Well, if you wasn't working, a grown person or a person in high school that had a job downtown, you would be a bus boy. If you worked in a hotel, you'd be a bellhop.
Mm-hmm.
The ladies would clean rooms,
Mm-hmm.
short order cooks, to the state dock, to the construction. And that's where my father worked. He worked on the state dock. From one side, they all called the big side. And if work was slow, he went to the banana shed. And when he would work there, a lot of Fridays, I would get on my bicycle and ride from the bottom to what is now the convention center. The big shed was there. United Fruit had that. And they would work the boats twice a week. And I would meet him and come uptown to a place called Public Cafe. That's where a lot of the longshoremen ate their lunch and walked back to the banana boat to work and finish working it.
Was that a black-owned restaurant?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
It was a white restaurant.
Did it have
But-
separate accommodations?
Exactly. And the longshoremen would eat on one side and the other people across the street from the jailhouse at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And that time it wasn't was it Water Street or Commerce Street? Because it's confusing. During our time, Commerce Street was in there where Water Street is now. The warehouses from the trains that was, the boxcars that was being loaded and unloaded, it looked entirely different from what we see today when we come off I-165 into Water Street to come into Mobile. It didn't look like that.
Okay. All right. Mr. Jones, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sam Jones. I was born at 458 North Franklin Street in what's considered to be the Orange Grove community. There was the Orange Grove housing project there, but we lived a block from the project. We never lived in the project. We lived a block from there. And all of my friends lived in the project. There were some houses, actually they were shotgun houses. We all lived in shotgun houses, and during that time it was real easy to keep them cool. You put a box fan in the back and open the front doors like air conditioning. So you had to walk through every room to get anywhere. You got to go through every room in the house to get from the back of the house to the front of the house. And I think my father was a merchant marine for about 45 years. My father had a philosophy, he never wanted my mother to work. He didn't think women should go to work. He thought that that was the man's role to take care of the household, whatever took place at the household. So she never did. We were living at that time with my grandmother. And my father came back from a long cruise and said, I'm gonna buy my own house. So then he went out on Rich Avenue in Pritchard and bought a house. About 6 years later, my mother passed away when I was like 10 years old. And we had to move back to the Orange Grove. And while in the Orange Grove, there was a man named Mr. Jesse Hardy. I started going to work with him when I was 9 years old. In the mornings, we'd go down to where the Riverview is now. There used to be a lot of little barbershops across the street and little cafes, and the Explorium is where the police department was at that time. So we go down there on Saturday morning, we shine shoes. We shine the policeman's shoes and shine shoes down there. And Mr. Hardy, he would always tell us, he'd say, look, don't you boys drink a lot of water. Because you know when we go down here, there's nowhere for us to go to the bathroom. And it wasn't.
Okay. So George, with all that you saw, did you feel like you were missing anything? Were you, in your daily life, were you comparing where you lived and what your experience was to other parts of the city where there were white people?
Oh yeah, because, you know, as boys, you would ride your bicycle. We go all down the bay, what they call that, because people down the bay, when you got to Government Street, they say, I'm going across town. That's a term you don't hear anymore, but it's down the bay. And you would see differences in the houses, the community, and the way the kids were, the schools that was open that you would pass, but you never stopped. You try to get through the neighborhoods as fast as you could. Now, that was an area where you look at now, around the auditorium, that area back down in there, it was mixed. That was white and blacks living back in that time next door to each other, eating out of each other's houses. That's a story that's never been told about Mobile.
So I guess what they call Church Street East, down near, off Church Street down
Yeah,
behind.
all the way on down. Yeah, it was totally different.
And the Seattle Cafe was down there.
Yeah.
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 It was totally different, you know, and the people that lived in the area, I don't know, it just felt like to me they seemed like they had more pride. And I guess because they was connected to the whites that was living down there. And there are parks that since I've been grown, that I've seen that I never did see as a child.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about on the other side of town, but each community had their own park where we had one on the north side. You would have to go to Maysville, to Homer Recreation Center. And until we started moving to Tourmanville, and that began to transition, they had that park out there and you dare not stop.
We were the first black family to move on Carlton Avenue in Tourmanville. We went out there about the fourth time. It looked like they had stood over like soldiers for sale signs. They were all the way down the street on both sides of the street. So my brother used to always kid and say, everybody else after us got a good deal on their house because it was exit time. So you know, we experienced all of that, and we still had to go to Central. And then they integrated Murphy in 1966. And when they integrated Murphy, not fully now, there were maybe about 20 students over there, and in '67 a few more, and then a few more that actually built up. But initially, I think it started in '66.
What year did you finish high school?
65. I was gone. I left here in August of '65. Mr. John LaFleur got me. You spoke about your father going to see. I started in the SIU, Seafarer International Union, and it was really segregated. Every black that I met when I went to the hall was sailing in the steward department, and I said, "Why are you all here? Stewards and cooks?"
Those are
and-
cooks, okay.
Yeah, and I'm saying, well, nobody else sails in the engine room, deck department. He said, no. And I met two guys that came here from New York that the union had allowed them to change over. Alan Wolf, he was sailing fireman, but he was sailing out of New York. And Bubba Showers, who later became a full captain, rose up through the deck department. He was sailing in the deck department, and things started opening, but they weren't opening fast enough for me. And I went down the bay to the National Maritime because those guys down there were sailing all over.
All stewards and cooks.
You know, and they sail fireman, oiler,
Yeah.
you know, bosun, whatever you wanted, whatever department. And I said, that's for me.
So SIU and N,
MU.
Yeah, NMU, National Maritimes,
okay.
and Seafarer International was two totally different unions,
Were
night
they-
and day.
So were both of them integrated?
They was
Yeah.
integrated to a point.
Yeah, they were.
To a point because the one on Dolphin Street was Seafarer, Dolphin and Lawrence.
Mhm.
You go in to eat, guys that you just got off the ship with, they're on that side eating, you in this room eating.
Okay. And so when you went to NMU, because it was more open in terms of
Oh, yeah.
the opportunities
Yeah.
that a black
The
seaman
black
could
guys could sell anything if you qualify.
Yeah, and NMU.
Yeah, NMU.
NMU is
Yeah.
where they had the, you remember where the Community Correction Center was?
Mhm.
That's who we
Yeah.
bought that from,
Yeah.
National Maritime Union.
National
That's where they were.
Maritime. That's where it is.
So you started shipping in 60,
65.
and how long did you do it?
I did it for 7 years, and I left and went to Hartford, Connecticut.
So how would, you left Alabama,
Left Alabama.
went to Connecticut.
Yes.
What
How
was
I
that
got
like?
there,
What was that like?
it
Just
was-
in
it was
terms
just
of,
like turning a light on at night. Yeah, that's what it was.
and that was Hartford more integrated? Was it segregated?
It was much more open. It was integrated. Kids was in integrated schools and all, but then there was some sense of segregation there because I can remember when my wife taught, you could count the kids on one hand down the south end. Most of them down there was Italians and Puerto Ricans.
So Ray, when did you start to see things starting to change? What, did anything happen? Can you think of anything that may have happened that started to make things change?
Well, I would say by different ones coming to Mobile.
Like who? Like who?
Like Rap Brown, Stoker Mike, Carmichael. Yeah. And then to my friend, he dead and gone, N.O.W. now.
Noble Beasley.
Yeah, Noble Beach.
So it was, those people were doing, they were the ones who would start to trigger the change.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, but then you can't leave out the nonpartisan voter league. Mr. John L. LaFleur and Sam is a product of what his name that took the city to court,
Mr. Bolden?
Bolden, Wally Bolden.
Yeah. Well,
He's a product of that change by taking the court to trial to get representation. Because at the time it was a 3 councilmen where they switched. And what kind of representation that?
Yeah.
None.
Yeah, when they had the 3 members, the
Three members, 3
yes,
city councilmen.
city, I think they called them commissioners.
Well,
Yeah, they were, yeah,
commission,
You're
whatever
right.
you call them, there was no representation.
right.
We were, but I think we were always looking at what was happening in other areas.
Yeah.
After the Civil Rights Bill passed, then you saw some things going on in Selma and Birmingham, Montgomery. A lot of those things really weren't going on in Mobile then.
They didn't happen.
But they, as Red say, they caught on after Noble Beasley and the Neighborhood Organized Workers came together, and several other groups, Nonpartisan Voters League, all of those folk came together trying to bring about some change in Mobile.
Yeah.
The thing about Mobile is that I don't know of any change that took place during that time that was voluntary. It was all through the federal courts.
Yes.
Whether it was putting someone on the school board, establishing a city council, putting someone on the county commission, all of that was the result of the federal courts, and predominantly Judge Virgil Pittman.
Exactly.
He actually handled all those cases.
Yeah.
And had it not been for that, it would have been much longer than that to get it done, because we had a 3-commissioner system. Nobody in the black community had any voice in anything that took place in the city. Nothing. Because you couldn't get elected, first of all.
Some people say Mobile never had a real civil rights movement, that basically black people in Mobile just kind of took things as they came, that they never really resisted. What do you think about that?
Well, like to say, they did not resist it too much.
Just a small group.
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you think that was? Why do you think that we didn't have, we didn't blow up like Selma and Montgomery and Birmingham?
Well, might have been afraid. That's the only reason I would say.
Afraid of losing jobs, getting afraid of being hurt, or
Well, it would have caused them to lose their job, most of them.
okay.
I remember when I came back to Mobile, and I think you remember, we put together a revenue sharing complaint because of discrimination in Mobile. And they sent an investigator here that stayed here for almost a month, a guy named Lee Williams. And this would be in the Mobile papers because they followed him everywhere he went. And what he found out was things we hadn't complained about. We were complaining about black policemen never being promoted. But what he found was, even in the fire service, the fire plugs in Trinity Gardens wouldn't put out a house if you hooked the thing to them. They didn't have any pressure on them. We found out in the personnel board, they cited the personnel board for racial discrimination in hiring. They did a whole lot. This guy found a whole lot. And the city had to change all of that. So that was one of the times that we saw some efforts to change, but it was about money. It was about, if you don't change, this $3 million we cut off, we're not gonna give it to you.
Okay.
And after that, some other things started happening with the personnel board, some things started happening in the community, and some things started changing. The ruling on Bowling versus the city of Mobile came down, which we really lost that case. And then later, that's something to read too, because later, they found that one of the attorneys who was on the other side, they found that he had made a statement in a document to one of the city commissioners, is that in this form of government, the reason we setting it up like we are, so black folk won't have no voice in government.
Okay.
And they use that as evidence. They call that smoking gun letter. And that letter reversed all of that. So that's how a lot of that took place. But I would say the late 60s, early 70s some things started happening, and they kind of got to the point where they really made some differences about 77 up.
And Wiley Bolden, that you were talking about a nonpartisan voters league, I think we ought to mention that the nonpartisan voters league ended up being started when the NAACP was outlawed
Yeah.
in the state of Alabama.
Yeah, that's right.
And then
Exactly.
then the nonpartisan voters league,
Heading,
right, took on the same kind of work.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because the NAACP couldn't function. So we get to Bolden versus City of Mobile, we get to the legislation, and then we have our, I guess by the time, so we get a black elected official in, I think the first was 74, John L. LaFleur. And you remember he died
You know.
before he could complete his term.
Yeah.
And then after him, we got Kane Kennedy, we got Buskey,
Buskey took over LaFleur's place.
right. Then 1978, we got Michael Figures in the state senate.
Yeah.
1980, all of these lawsuits,
Got
Douglas
Doug
Wicks,
Wicks.
Kind of open.
right, Douglas Wicks, 1980. But we really, then the big one was the one that you were talking about, that saying, Sam
Yeah.
was the beneficiary, and that was when we got the city council, in the city
85.
council form of government in
Exactly.
1985.
And then, it's good at the right time in history that it be the right person to be the recipient of such things. And Sam, and I would say this, argue this point, if he wasn't here, was the right person to be there with his demeanor of people to become mayor of this city in transition, in form of government.
There was a lot of things that, once something like that happens, and then you find that when you get there, you find that there's so many institutional forms of racism
Yeah, but
within the operation.
Yeah, but you got a chance to crack the door.
Oh yeah, I
and,
mean,
and that's what you need, a person to crack the door.
and that's what I was about to
Yeah.
speak to, because once you get there, you found out there was systems within the system that were put together to limit the progress
Okay.
of people in a lot of different areas. And when you start dismantling some of that, what I found was that the people who were running some of those systems, who at that time were just about all white when I got there, other than the Al Stokes and 2 or 3 more, but they wanted to change. Because what they did was they wound up with some awful employees that they had to hire just because they were somebody's friend.
Exactly.
Not because they was a good worker.
Yeah.
Just because they were somebody's friend. So a lot of that started breaking up. And then, I think that overall, during that period, there was a character that developed in Mobile that kind of changed things. My philosophy about that is every city develops a character by which it is known. Whether it's good or bad, you develop that by which you are known. And Mobile had developed a character earlier of being closed in. Unless you were in certain little groups, unless you knew certain people, you wasn't gonna move anywhere in Mobile.
Yeah.
When I was at Community Action, there was a guy who was losing his sight, and I used to have senior citizens program where senior citizens come over there, and he wanted to come every morning and talk to me when I got there, because he wanted me to tell his history in Mobile. He's a white guy who moved here from Miami, who built some housing and went to the banks in Mobile to try to get it refinanced. And he said they took him over to the Appleton Club. And about 8 people sit up there in the Appleton Club and say, now I tell you what, we can help you because you got a good development. But one of us gonna have to have a piece of it if we help you.
And I heard that was the biggest problem in Mobile.
And years ago, there was someone from St. Petersburg Times wrote an article about Mobile, and the title of the article was How High the Cost of Industry, which means that there were certain families that got together and controlled everything that came here. And this guy used to sit in my office, T.A. Donovan was his name. He sit in my office every day and tell me the whole story of it, because he came here as a multimillionaire, and he said the regime in Mobile broke him while he was here because he wouldn't bow down to them. They wanted him to give up half of his companies and what he was doing. So when I heard that and started looking at things, I saw what he talked about. I saw it, unless you get to the point where you are actually around these people, you don't understand that. But when we were trying to recruit industry, and I had to be on the trip because I'm the mayor,
Yeah.
and the biggest situation I had is when one of the very wealthy people in Mobile told me at a meeting, he said, I tell you what now, don't you talk. Let him do the talking. And that didn't come off too well. I mean, the meeting was kind of over when he said that because I told him what I felt about it in front of all of them. And he said, well, no, you didn't understand what I mean. I said, oh, no, I lived long enough to understand just what you meant about it. And that's how some of that was broke up. But that's the way it really was. And I think a lot of progress has been made since then. I think there's still a lot of progress to be made.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's quite a bit to be made because the period we talked about earlier, the period George talked about, Red talked about, that I talked about earlier, you do realize that there were twice as many black businesses then as there are now.
Absolutely.
Twice as many.
So we went from a segregated community where there were clear lines about economics, who had, who didn't, clear lines about what services were available, parks, like you mentioned, George. You could go one community, you find them. You go to other communities, they're not there. Then you get to a point where you don't have no black elected representation, then you begin to get it. And then once you made that shift, you got the political power, then it becomes clearer that there's an economic side to this.
Yeah.
The economic nut, I think, has been harder to crack
It has.
Yeah.
than
It
the political one. It's like, okay, y'all can vote now. You can have your elected officials, but the stranglehold that we have on the economics,
Job
it's going to be
access.
harder to get us.
Job access.
Yeah, it's going to be harder to get us to release that. So if you could change anything, the one thing that you could do that you think might improve the condition for black folk in Mobile right now, what would it be?
It would be better job, at least.
Better jobs,
Yeah. Better job.
better good paying jobs.
Yeah.
Better good paying jobs. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, and what would be the thing that you would do that you think would have the most impact on improving conditions and for black folk in Mobile?
I think what I'd want to do is, as it relates to the economics of the community, I think sometimes every community get painted with the same brush, and it doesn't function that way. Businesses that'll work on Airport Boulevard won't work on St. Stephen Road. And I think you have to consider that. When you're developing, you have to consider that. It's to the benefit of every citizen in Mobile for all the communities to prosper. Not that we're going to develop this, and then we got to try to figure out what to do with the north side. And that's kind of what happens in Mobile. The whole while I was there, everybody would come to me and say, well, we want to develop something, but we want it to be on the west side of 65. And that's a problem. Because there's an old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
And when I used to meet with the chamber, the thing I used to tell them about that is it does not lift the boats that's not in the water. They stay right where they are. Rising tide has no effect on them.
So you look through the pictures, do they look familiar back in the day?
Yeah, back, oh, yeah.
Now this one, Children at Play, I was trying to figure out, were there a lot of dirt roads?
That was a typical.
Well, you
picture.
remember that during the time we were coming up in school, right before we got to, and we were in junior high school, Trinity Garden wasn't a part of the city.
It was county.
He was in the county.
No,
But
I
that's
know.
a typical
I
shot.
know it wasn't even my house in Trinity Garden, nothing but rag swamp.
Plateau too. Plateau had
Not
the
the
boat.
first house, wasn't that street.
That probably was either in
Trinity
Plateau or
Garden.
Trinity Garden.
And I told her that's a typical street back in the day. Before they did the resurfacing, put in sewer. I mean, sewer too.
Oh yeah, these are the streets that during that time people used to come out, especially the ladies. They come out and water the street,
Yeah.
keep the dust from coming up in the house.
You talk about urban renewal. You can see that Henry Aaron Loop, where Broad Street stopped in front of the college, in front of Caldwell.
Right.
That's where Dad
Right.
did it, right
Yeah.
there.
That was Broad. Then they did Beauregard Street.
Yeah. And then when we moved, they started opening. People were just a mass movement there.
Yeah.
In Orange Grove, like your
Yeah.
houses went away. All the single family homes,
They took all.
all
and
that went away overnight.
And it was condemnation.
Yeah,
They
overnight.
condemned every house over there.
So it was called urban renewal, but it really destroyed communities.
It did.
Entire community.
It did.
And the only, the thing that was always a puzzle to me, the apartments they left over there on Conception Street were built in 1939.
And they still there.
And they left them, and the ones that were built in 65, they tore out.
Too.
And I was told by the people at the housing board that the ones that were built in 39 were actually much better structures.
Were those the ones that were built to for the war effort during the war effort?
Right.
And
right.
it started out being white tenants, and then it became black tenants.
Very quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that one is one that that's the only one you find that they don't have streets and they got courts.
Courts, that's the
First
only-
court, second court, third
Yeah,
court, fourth
yeah.
court.
And
They
when you-
still identified like that.
And when you talk to people from back in the day term, and you say, I lived in Orange Grove, you did? Yeah. What court did you live in?
Yeah.
Because they
And
named
you
it
say
by court.
you don't live in Orange Grove if you don't have a court address.
You didn't live there, you just talk.
You lived in the Orange Grove community, but not the Orange Grove project.
It was so large at one time, and I didn't know this until later, but the police department bought Jeeps. The black officers that patrolled over there used to patrol in Jeeps. You know why they had Jeeps? They had to have something that could run through the project. And that's what they patrolled that area. They ain't patrolled nowhere else with them, but over there.
So that was because of the
Oh yeah,
The condition of
they
the
had to
road.
bump up on the curves and come down the sidewalks, and that's what they go all the time. They used to have little garbage bins where you put your garbage can, and all the guys used to sit out there at night. They had party in the garbage bin.
Party, sing,
Yeah.
talk.
this the photo of this window shopping.
That's a store downtown.
So did y'all ever have the experience of going into somewhere to buy a pair of shoes but you couldn't try them on?
Well, Hardee's let you try on
They'll
anything.
let you try them on.
Like they had Hardee's downtown on Royal Street.
John Hardy.
It's on Royal Street, right at Dolphin. Hardee's would imitate any
Any
shoe
shoe.
that was made. Like if you couldn't afford a pair of Johnson Murphy, you go across the street to Hardee's, they got a pair that look just like.
And I think all the prices was the same.
Oh,
in
yeah.
one. All the prices.
And so you could try them on.
Oh yeah. They might have did that in Damage. I ain't never make it to Damage. I couldn't afford them shoes.
And it's so funny because you had men's shoe stores. You don't have them now.
Yeah.
Were there certain places you couldn't try on stuff?
I'm saying probably. But it never happened to me in Mobile.
But you could go down the street, they had a place called Federal Credit Clothiers.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is, the guy who ran the place, my grandmother go down there, he'd have a big rocking chair. Sit down there, get a Coca-Cola, and you go around and look, and he find you a suit. Remember, let that boy put that coat on. The coat be much too big. He have it
Oh,
at
you-
the back.
you
He
talking
grab it
about-
at the back
Grab it
just
in the
right.
back.
You talking about red whiskers?
Yeah.
Good it fit. Good it fit.
Put
That
it
what
in
it
the
fit. Get up the
Tighten it
And then he
coat.
said, well, how much it gonna be? Don't worry about it. It's $10 a month from now on.
Well, I think some of those, that gets back to that economic piece
Oh, yeah.
where people buy furniture, they were going,
Yeah.
they give credit.
Oh yeah.
They
Better
go in
bed.
and give credit. You just
bed.
pay
You ain't have to go to
or
them.
weekly.
They come to you.
Had that little paper book.
You show what you want. They sit it out there.
Yeah, he write you every week.
And when he come to collect, he come in every week
Yeah.
to collect.
Well, I'll tell y'all, and we can close something that it took me a long time to figure out what was going on. When I was growing up, my mama had some rules. You know the rule about don't drink anything? Well, the rules were, when we were going to downtown, you had to use the bathroom before you left home.
Exactly.
You had to eat before you left home. And we always took a cab. My mama didn't start driving until legally until 1962. She was on maternity leave with my little sister. So I would talk to people and they'd talk about getting on the bus and getting in the back of the bus. And one day it just became clear to me the reason we always took a cab downtown was because she wasn't gonna get in the back of the bus.
Okay.
The reason we were not going to drink water, eat, or use the bathroom was because she was not going to use a segregated facility.
Yeah.
I remember one time using the bathroom downtown. It was at the bus station. And when you went in the bus station, they had a little box on the door. And if you had a dime, you put your dime inside the thing, and then the door would pop open. Now we would use that because you had to have a dime. It wasn't race, it was the dime.
It wasn't free.
And my mama never really said it. She never really talked about it. And when I tell people I never sat in the balcony at the Sanger, at my age, it's hard for them to believe. I could see anything at the Booker T, anything at the Lincoln. That's where we went, on the avenue. And we could see it there. But her thing was, it was kind of a silent protest because she never said, this is why. We just never did it.
That was one advantage of sitting in the balcony, though, at the Singer. You could throw popcorn over the rail.
Yeah, you would. And get up, and if you're getting ready to leave, you may take some water, throw it over, and just go on
Go
out
out the back door.
the back door.
So we had all kinds of, we survived. And people found different ways to make it through.
Oh, you
Oh, yeah.
did.
All right, thank you.